Welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester, a weekly podcast designed to inform and entertain you and introduce you to some really interesting people. I'm your host, Chuck Hester, and my guest today is one of my favorite people. His name is Jeff Nischwitz, and he is a snow globe shaker. Jeff is the founder of the Nischwitz Group, a speaking, consulting, and coaching company that transforms people and organizations one truth at a time. As I mentioned, he's known as the snow globe shaker, and he's on a mission to help people shift how they lead and thereby shift their leadership impact. A former and, thank goodness, now recovered lawyer, Jeff is an international speaker and personal transformation coach. He's also the author of 4 leadership and business books, including his most recent one, Just One Step, Walking Backwards to the Present on the Camino Trail. He's also working on his next book, Snow Globe Leadership, which will be published later this year. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Hey, Chuck. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to see you. As you pointed out off camera, it's been a while.
It has been a while, but we've had some great conversations over the last couple of months and over the years, for sure. Yeah. So we mentioned it a couple of times in the intro. So people, and I use it as a tease in the actual event itself. But let's start with Snow Globe Shaker. Talk to us about that, because that's a fascinating term and I want to hear more about it.
So I always have one of these close by. It wasn't just for today. This happens to be one of my favorites because it's from Wicked. I got to see Wicked in London, obviously pre-COVID. So a couple years ago on stage, and I know you've done some speaking, Chuck, and one thing I've learned is when something comes to me on stage, I just say it and figure it out later. And I started talking about snow globes, which was weird because I don't think I owned a snow globe and don't think I'd ever thought of that. And now 3 or 4 years later, it's a core sort of, not just to my brand, but to my mindset that I offer and live myself. And it goes like this. So here's a snow globe, right? And snow globes exist for a single purpose, actually. Their primary purpose is to be shaken. That's why they have fluid in there. That's why they have all the cool sparklies or the snow, whatever it is. And yet I discovered that most people who have snow globes never shake the snow globe because it is good enough as it is. And I also realized that when we stop shaking the snow globe, everything immediately starts to settle. And so the metaphor of the snow globe is that it is vital for us to continually shake our snow globe, both personally, professionally, if we're a business owner, and to encourage the people around us, such as our friends, family, and our team members, to shake theirs. Notice I said to have them shake theirs, not shake it for them, because I've realized that's part of the source of stress. We go in and sort of grab people's snow globes and start shaking them. So part of this is to continually disrupt. This is disruption happening, especially internally, and leaders go first. That's the deal. But we also have to shift. We have to shift things because otherwise, after we shake it up, nothing really changed. And so I've actually created a new little phrase. It's going to be part of my new book, as we said, coming out later this year. Borrowing from the Bond movies, you may remember this line, but the line that goes with the snow globe is shaken, not settled. The idea is we've got to shake things up, but we can't settle, and we've got to continue to shift our thinking, can shift our actions to really change the outcomes. Otherwise, we just have a bunch of this. And the last thing I will share, because it's important as we're transitioning out of COVID, is I have had a lot of people the last 8 months say, Jeff, I don't know that I need to shake anything up because I've been disrupted for the last year plus by COVID. And my response is, nope, you're wrong. That when we're being shaken externally, we need even more to shake internally. Because if we don't shake things up, our perspectives, our thinking, our attitudes, when we're being shaken by the outside world, we're just getting slammed around. And that's what happened to a lot of people. They forgot or didn't know to shake things up internally, and they got slammed around by the external disruption. So that's the gist of the snow globe and the snow globe shaker. And my friends know that it's something I not only talk about, but walk about throughout my life.
What a great metaphor. I mean, truly, honestly is. And we will, as we mentioned pre-show, we will get into, post-COVID work and what that's going to look like, because that's a trending topic right now, lack of a better way to put that. But I want to do something first, Jeff, and then we'll get into specifics on leadership. I've done it for this last 26 times. Always ask my guests origin stories, if you will. And we mentioned the fact that, as you put it, you're a recovered lawyer, I think is the way you put it, something along
fully
that line.
Recovered now.
There you go, fully recovered. That's good. You went through the rehab and all that good stuff. Yeah. But how does talk about your beginnings? I mean, I talked to Craig Newmark once, and he said, "Yeah, I was an IBM nerd, and that's how I started. And my friends like to had to do events, so we created Craigslist. That's kind of great stories like that." So, what's the Jeff Nischwitz story from lawyer to leadership snow globe shaker?
Well, we all do have a story, and I don't think mine's interesting, but everyone else does, and that's what I've learned. That
we'll be the judge of that, Jeff.
Right?
Right.
So I was a bit of a nerd in the sense that I decided to become a lawyer when I was about 15 years old, which I think back and think, what 15-year-old decides I'm going to be a lawyer? There were no lawyers in the family. There were no relatives. My dad wasn't a lawyer. I didn't even know any lawyers that well, but I decided to become a lawyer largely because my mother, who sadly passed away about 3 years ago, used to say to me, "Jeff, you should be a lawyer because you love to argue and you're really good at it." And I thought, well, but if that's true, then every teenager should be a lawyer because all teenagers love to argue with their parents. I was good at it. I was good at debate and that thing. So I decided to become a lawyer, set my path, and I knocked it out. I decided at 15 I was going to be a partner in a corporate law firm. And at age 33 after law school, I had achieved that goal. I was a partner in a corporate law firm. But that's when I started looking around to say, but is what's next? And is this really where I want to be? I realized that was not where I belonged, and decided to go start my own law firm, which I then did for another 7 years. So I practiced for 17 years, the last 7 in my own firm. And I realized, I won't say I woke up one day and realized, but over time I realized that I really was good at being a lawyer and building a law firm and running a law firm, except I hated practicing law. And I decided to quit. And I walked away from a firm that I had built that had my name first on the door, knowing that there was a risk to the firm. But I realized at that point in my life 2 things: that if you think things are okay, like they're okay, they're actually worse. And the other thing I learned is that I'm not going to do something, or I decided more than learn, I'm not going to do something I don't love. And then I went on a journey to find what I found now. And I will say this, and then we can, pull some more threads. People like to say, just what you said, how do you go from being a lawyer to this leadership speaker and transformation coach and doing this deep work when you're over here, you're just a lawyer? And I tell people, I'd love to tell you it was a great plan, brilliantly executed. But what it really was more like, almost literally, was a car wreck. That I'm going down the highway, high rate of speed, which I usually do. And I left the highway, flipped a couple times, but synchronistically or miraculously, depending on your belief system, the car landed on its wheels, was severely damaged but drivable. Driver was the same, damaged, broken in some ways, broken bones, but still here. And I drove in the direction the car pointed. And people hear that and say, oh, come on. But I will tell you, the real quick closure to this story is I wrote a book for lawyers on how to run law firms like a business, because that's what I cared about, the business side. But when I did that, I didn't have a coaching practice. I didn't have a consulting practice. I had a job. I was doing business development. I had no use for the book except I wanted to write a book. I just did it to write a book. I thought it would be cool. And someone bought the book. And someone called me and said, I love your book. Do you do coaching? And I, of course, gave the correct answer, which is yes, I do. And they said, what's it look like? I said, well, it's all customized. What do you need? And fast forward 6 months later, I had coached 13 of their lawyers and said, that's what I want to do. And I want to go in that direction, but I was still afraid. And I still had a story that I can't do that until everything's smoothed out. And about 4 months later, the people I was working with, seemed to be going great. They thought it was going great, but we were in the midst of the Great Recession, and they let me know that they were laying me off. And I remember thinking, I guess now is the time. And I dove off another cliff. I had limited financial resources. I had gone through a severe financial trauma as a result of a failed business. I was going through a divorce. Worst possible time in my life to start a business financially. And I did. And now I'm 12 plus years later, here I am. And the business has evolved. I've evolved. But it has been a journey for sure.
No doubt about it. Yeah, and you parallel to a certain extent, because on this podcast on a regular basis, I talk about what I call COVID blessings and the passion pivot. I've got clients that I work with on LinkedIn, and I've got one of my favorites is a former Air Force logistics officer who also was a speech therapist, decided to become a voiceover artist, and she used the time during COVID to be able to put that together. So those type of things happen, and the reason I asked that question, and I'm not going to say you fell right into that, because you're quite good at doing what you do. But the reason I do that is because of listeners that want to understand, okay, so I'm thinking about this and I like this idea, but golly, scary as hell to be able to do something like that, and to be able to see people like you and some of the other guests that I've had to be able to walk that through. And I know where your passions lie, Jeff, and full disclosure, we've had an occasion where we got 3 or 4 people together for a quick, what we called a Zoom happy hour, if you will. And every single time that Jeff does it, he's on his porch at night with a stogie and a whiskey. And, I'm like, okay, he's got it going on. This is really cool. So let's talk about some passions.
Real quick, Chuck,
please.
To those listeners, because there's a lot of those, I would offer them 2 things.
Please.
People love to believe, and they believe it of me, that everything was lined up for me, and that's how I was able to take the leap. And that's why I share the truth, that you don't have to have things lined up. It's your choice if you leap. But, I always say, they'll say, well, you don't understand. I say, you don't understand my story either. I was in a horrible place to start a business, and I did it. And here's the second part. What I learned in that moment was it's always the right time for the right thing. And that is something that I have carried forward now for 13 years. It is always the right time for the right thing. The key is not to figure out the right time. The key is to figure out the right thing.
Dead on, man. No doubt about it. So Jeff Nischwitz's passion, building people and culture leadership. Talk to us about that. I mean, especially now, like I said, towards the end, we'll get into the hybrid work. What does it look like after COVID? Those type of things. But building people and culture, because that's a significantly important right now.
Well, I like that you started with the building the people side, because when I look at what do I do and why do I do it, like what's the real passion? People throw out passion, and to me, passion is not what I label. Passion is the outcome of living my mission. So that for me is the truth, that if when I figure out the mission and I live in mission and stay in mission, the passion follows that. So I don't have passion for the mission. The mission allows my passion to come out. And my mission is to build people up. And that means building up leaders and team members and their organizations. It also means building up individuals. I have a gift that I guess was given to me and somewhat honed, that I'm able to discern the magic in people, all the potential in them, and help them peel the layers of the onion off to help really just uncover that. I don't believe we have to give people things. What we're doing is taking away old belief systems, old stories, old cultural stories, things that has been modeled for them, like in leadership. Leadership today, one of the biggest challenges is the leaders today were led by people who led a different way. And that way doesn't work anymore. That way does not serve us anymore, yet that's what people are familiar with. So making a change to that can feel terrifying, and it involves being willing to be vulnerable. And that's the word for me today is, what does it look like to be a vulnerable leader, whether it's running an organization, starting a business, leading a team, leading your family, frankly, leading your life, and having an impact in the community or the world just by how you show up every day. And that's my core message to folks. How you show up every day has an impact. And is it the impact you want to have? Is it an intended impact? Is it an unintended impact? So it's not about can you have an impact? It's about being more intentional about the impact you are having every day.
Excellent stuff. And you mentioned when we were talking earlier about there's an issue with the state of leadership and a leadership gap. What do you mean by a leadership gap?
Well, I'm going to say it as simply as I can, and I'll add on a couple of layers. The biggest leadership gap I see is we have lost humanity in leadership. And in many ways, in some cases, we never had it, because I'm almost 62 years old. So I grew up, and my father was born in 1937. So my father grew up in a work world where business, and there was no talk of team engagement. It was about you're getting compensated for your work, do your work well, work hard, we will pay you well, and we will take care of you in the form of pension and retirement. That has been gone for decades now. But I grew up seeing that, and I grew up in a world where I didn't ask questions about the quality of my life or balance in my life. I got in and I cranked because I knew and had been taught that if I work hard and do good work, I will elevate and I will achieve my goals. Now, the cost for me was extensive. Ended up in some ways costing me a marriage. It cost me some relationship and time with my children. I wish I could undo it. I can't. But I grew up in a world, and people right behind me grew up in a world where, frankly, we didn't care what people thought about their work environment. Mm-hmm. We just made sure that they were physically safe. That was it. The bar was physical safety. But today, the bar has changed. And do not get caught up in this is about millennials. And now we're going to, oh my God, the millennials. It's not about millennials. It's about multiple generations who are saying, I want to work someplace where my work matters. I want to work somewhere where the people I work with, I feel like they see me, value me, care about me, and want me to grow. And they give me the tools and opportunities to grow. I want to experience empathy at work. I want to know that I can trust my leaders, and I only trust people I know, which requires that they be vulnerable. So there's this massive gap between what does it look like to be a human leader, really care about your people, put your people first, be willing to be empathetic and vulnerable and committed to their growth. Because to me, that's what leaders are about. And that's what leadership is. And when leaders say, I'd love to do more for my people, but I'm busy doing this other stuff. My question is, what the hell are you doing? Because your job as a leader is to grow your people and build them up. That's your job. If this other stuff, somehow you got lost. And a lot of those people got lost because that's what was modeled for them. And they never had someone who led them and cared about them and helped them to grow. So to them, it's foreign. It's like, well, why are you changing the deal? And why do I have to do that for you? So to me, the gap is about humanity and really modeling a caring for your people. Not caretaking, but caring about who they are, where they're going, and what their experience is like. And that's a huge gap in my mind.
Yeah, and we are contemporaries in that, I am 62 and my dad worked for Westinghouse for 42 years. And all he really honestly cared about was, he gets the paycheck and he's going to get the pension, which he did. And he didn't quite understand why, as an agency marketing person, I was leaping, every other year. He said, what's wrong with the organization you work for? Aren't they taking care of you? Those type of things. And the other thing I want to point out too, Jeff, and you mentioned it, is there is, I think, a misconception, which you have pointed out, of generational differences in work. I know hundreds of millennials. I know hundreds of Zs and Xs, and I can't put them into categories as far as work goes. I've got people that I work with on a regular basis that are the most amazing people and the hardest workers you've ever seen. And I've got our generation folks who are just the laziest son of a guns you'll want to meet. So they just clock in and check the boxes. So interesting that you bring that up as far as that goes. And right now, as you've mentioned, and I guess we're going to get into it, Jeff, because I think this is going to be more than like a 3-minute answer type of situation. My normal tee up on this is, okay, so you've walked through COVID over the last year or so. And my first question would be, how has that affected your business? And then how has that affected your clients' businesses? We'll start there. But you and I are going to dive a little deeper, as we've talked about, in regards to COVID and post-COVID work.
Well, so the impact of my business was very real. It was a challenging year. And I'll clarify what I mean by challenging. So pre-COVID, as of March 15th of 2020, my business was 60% speaking, and that was growing, and 40% coaching. And the other significant fact was, and now I've learned, not sure how I do differently, but the other fact is that I didn't market coaching. So my speaking was also the sales funnel for my coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And on March 15th, that disappeared. So on March 15th, over about a 30-day period, I lost 60% of my business there. I lost another 20% roughly of a couple coaching clients who got scared and said, we're out for a while. And on top of that, all the marketing for coaching was gone. So I will tell you, 2020 was a financially challenging year. Now, I will say this. I learned a lot. I'm not a huge fan of the word pivot, because just for me, pivot suggests I turned in a lot of directions but didn't go. So I pivoted direction and moved in new directions. I created new offerings. I created marketing channels. My business is healthier today than it was a year ago. And financially, it's not where it was a year ago, but it's healthier because it's more diversified, it's better offerings, it's more systematic. But the great thing for me is, while it was a financially challenging year, I wouldn't say it was an emotionally challenging year, because I had some ups and downs, but because of how I choose to lead myself and my small team, and how I just tend to navigate life differently than a lot of people, a lot because of this snow globe concept of disrupting my thinking and disrupting my perspectives and having control over how I see things. I did not have a challenging year emotionally last year, but a lot of people did. So a lot of innovation. And what I saw in my clients was the people I work with, and it's predictable, but unfortunate. A lot of the people I do now, for example, we stopped doing events, live events, and the whole world thinks that everybody went virtual, but that's not true. What you know about are the groups that did go virtual, but a lot of those events disappeared. And the events that did go online are smaller in length, shorter in time, fewer native speakers, and lower fees, which means much smaller budgets for speakers. So the speaking business is still a long way from coming back. I will tell you that. But what my clients did is many of them turned it off. That's what we do when we're scared, right? We turn off people development. And a lot of my work is people development. It's about leadership, management, communication, engagement, culture, all things that are even, in my opinion, more critical during a pandemic or anything like it. But frankly, a lot of the businesses said, no, we're going to hunker down, and we're going to just focus on getting through this. So there's a real interesting question here, and I'll close with this for the moment, Chuck. I believe that what happened over the last year is leadership got tested. And as we're coming out of this, it's getting tested again. And people will answer this question about their leaders, and they're going to say this about 2020. They're either going to say, thanks for being there and having my back, or where the hell were you? And I've heard stories of both. And those people who are saying, where the hell were you? They're coming out of this looking for, where am I going next? Because my leadership, my organization wasn't there for me. All they did was they took care of me physically, but they didn't take care of me psychologically and emotionally. And that's what leadership requires today, is creating psychological and emotional safety for our people, not just physical safety. So the reckoning is coming. I just saw a survey last week that was saying that I think 33% of the people interviewed, these are all mid-level management and up, 33% of the people are looking to make a move as soon as they figure out sort of things settle down a little bit. That's a big number.
Yeah, absolutely. And pre-show, we talked about this. So yes, COVID, and how do you work during COVID? How do you work remote is a disruption. But you were saying, if I get this right, Jeff, and correct me if I don't, you're saying basically post-COVID work is going to be even a bigger disruption.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about that, man.
Yeah, I will tell you, I didn't do a lot of speaking, certainly in person last year, but I remember speaking early last August. So this is already, 6 months ago. And I told the group of leaders, these were all business owners. I said, you think you had a tough time making decisions as we went into COVID, but those were actually easy decisions. Think about the fact that most of those businesses had said, we're not going to have remote workers. And within 2 weeks, they had remote workers. So I said, you made decisions you had to make, but your decisions coming out of COVID are much more challenging because none of these are based on what you have to do. Now you got to make decisions about what's best for your people or not. How are you going to make those decisions? What's it going to look like? What do you do with the differences in people? One of my podcast guests last year made a comment that going forward, leadership is going to require a lot more flexibility because we can't treat everybody the same. So we have a lot of people that during COVID said, I love working from home. I'd like to work in the office a little bit, but I love this flexibility. I love the quality of life I have. And other people are saying, I got to get back to the office because I don't have a family. I'm isolated. I'm depressed. What do you do with those people? Do you treat them the same or differently? Everybody's using the word, last year the word was pivot, right? Mm-hmm. Right now the word is hybrid. If I heard the word hybrid again, if I didn't hear it 100 times yesterday, I heard it 1,000 times. And then we go, what is a hybrid and how do we make these decisions? And as we share it offline and we can dig into this, I'm seeing leaders and organizations really do this well. And I am seeing some, let's just say mildly dropping the ball big time in how they're approaching these decisions going forward.
Willing to give examples without giving names?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples that I would say are not really great stories. One is a very large organization. I don't know how many people they have, probably, thousands of employees, $1 billion plus. They've been working remotely for a long time. Some people are back in the office. Well, they've determined everybody's coming back to the office in the fall. Mm-hmm. And what they said is everybody's been saying, we want some flexibility. We want flexibility. We want flexibility. So he not only listened to the decision, but how it was communicated. The CEO, who, by the way, is 55 plus and white male, and I'm saying that for you can interpret it your own way, calls his direct reports together, apparently has never talked to any of them, and says, here's what I've decided. There's not going to be any discussion. There's not going to be any other input. I know some of you don't like it. This is the deal because we need people in the office, which really ought to be said is I need people in the office.
Right.
So didn't get any input. And here's what he said. It's going to be 1 day remote a week. That's it. 4 days in the office. And I'm sure what that person is thinking is, well, I'm offering hybrid. They asked for hybrid. I gave them a hybrid. But did you really address their needs? If you didn't ask the question, that's the failure of leadership. It's not the decision as much as you didn't engage your people, find out what was going on for them, find out what flexibility looks like for them. And I would say, because I know some people there, ignoring the reality that they are losing people and not getting people because they don't have a strong, flexible policy. So that's number one example. I would say that's an epic failure. The other is a group that did get some input and talk to people, and they don't have people in agreeing. And I believe they're coming back with a 3 and 2, 3 days in the office, 2 out. So it's definitely some flexibility. But here's what struck me. They're saying a lot of their people wanted more remote work, more flexibility. But leadership was saying, but it's important for our culture. That was the phrase. It's important for our culture to have people here. And yet, what their people are experiencing is, and we know the numbers, I'm going to tell you right now, Chuck, the thing that just torques me is the research is conclusive that the vast, not just majority, almost everybody is actually more productive working from home than working in the office. We did not lose productivity. Productivity is the same or up. So people are more productive. They're happier. They have a more balanced life. They're spending more time with their family and things they care about. They're not wasting time in the car. And so they're having a better experience at work with their work. So hang on a second. So they're more productive, they're happier, and their lives are better. What culture are we creating by forcing them to come to the office?
Mm-hmm.
That's my question. So I encourage leaders to think about what word are you throwing around versus what are you actually talking about? And if you're going to talk to your people and make a decision that doesn't align with what they've asked for, be prepared to tell them what's really going on. And frankly, be prepared that they might call bullshit on you.
Well, and on top of that, and you talked a little bit about that. And I want to get to a phrase you mentioned earlier as well in regards to, aligning your personal life, which is an amazingly important thing to do. But when a CEO, VP, head of whatever, those type of people are saying, okay, well, here's 3-2 or 4-1 or whatever that may be, and they don't do that, then they're not walking the walk either. So that's the other part of that. I think you're obviously as a great leadership coach and consultants, you understand the importance of being able to do that. But I think it's amazingly important to be able to, and we'll see, Jeff. I mean, you and I were talking about this. Like, if I see another article, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, that starts with the term hybrid work, you and I are whiskey lovers, so I'll go grab another shot. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be the bottom line on that. So I'll be curious to see how this all shakes out. No pun intended there. Come the fall, because it seems to be like September timeframe is where people are saying, yeah, after summer, your kids are supposed to be back in school. Let's make it happen. Be curious to see what happens with that. So,
well, here's an interesting question I have, Chuck, that I really just started thinking about the last couple of days. The data, the strong research is showing that for a lot, and this is not a surprise, that over the last 14 months, stress levels are higher, depression rates are higher, anxiety rates are higher. In fact, I saw some research recently that said year over year, February to February, depression risk was up 150%, which I thought was pretty high already. Risk of anxiety disorder was up 80%. And what we're hearing is that burnout numbers are high during COVID, partly due to the stress, but partly due to the work life, because people are actually working harder. They're not able to get away. They weren't able to take vacations and actually go somewhere. And they're actually working more hours because it's right there. The computer's right there. And people are having to learn how to separate themselves from work at home. So what's interesting is stress, anxiety, and burnout in many areas are up because people are working from home. And yet people are really wanting to keep working from home. So one question I have is, are people paying attention to what they really need? By the way, I believe in flexibility. I have my own business, so I can do that. I love it. But I feel like there's this collision possibly happening that people are not going to address their burnout issues from flexible workplace, but they're going to go into that. And if we don't pay intentional attention to it, we have a risk. And the last thing I'll share is this statistic I heard on our podcast yesterday. Our guest is in the mental health industry. He said that the statistics show that when people are struggling with a significant issue, not just regular stress, but with a significant issue, a mental health issue, depression, anxiety, not just stress. On average, people don't seek help for it for 8 to 9 years. Years, because there's so much stigma around that, and the willingness to ask for help, say, I'm really struggling. And it's not modeled at work, right? Because their leaders are not saying, hey, I went out and got some help. Their leaders are saying, I got this. Why don't you have this?
Right.
That was a shocking and a scary number. And my concern is that coming out of COVID, from a mental health perspective, I've also seen some research that says the trauma associated with the pandemic and some of the divisiveness in this country and the social justice issues, that many people have experienced trauma equivalent to post-traumatic stress during 2020. What's being done about that? Because if you've had PTSD level trauma, you don't just get over it. There needs to be some support in place. So I think we're going into a unique time, and my call to action to leaders and organizations is this, Chuck. I've just started sharing this. People spend most of their lives at work or in their work function. You take out sleep, even if they're at home working, the majority of their life is about work. I'm saying, why can't work and what happens at work and the way people are supported at work be part of the solution to the stress and the burnout and the overwhelm and all that? And I think there's an opportunity for organizations to say to our people, we know you're struggling. We're going to create scenarios here that are not just about work, but we're going to let you know that we care so much. We're going to be part of the solution for your life. And when you get organizations that do that, talk about being the employer of choice, and more importantly, playing a role in a greater need of our community and our world. And that to me is what our organizations and leaders have a chance to do if they choose to step that way.
Fascinating. And it kind of dovetails with the other two things I want to talk about briefly, but bed talk in particular. And for those of you who don't know from Jeff, and we'll talk about how you can be in touch with him. He's one of my heroes, along with a lot of folks I've had on my podcast, that if you reach out to him, he'll connect. I mean, he's not one of those guys that, no, I'm sorry, I'm this big leadership coach, I don't have time to talk to you. Those are the time, well, frankly, and most of my listeners know this, those are not the type of people I hang out with to begin with, that side of it. But bed talk, which you do, is that Monday through Friday, or are you doing 7 days?
Monday through Friday.
Monday through Friday for 2 to 3 minutes worth of amazing wisdom from Jeff. And I just want to point out two things real quick. And I knew this was going to happen, Jeff. We're actually moving along rather quickly to the point. If you believe it or not, we've been talking for close to 40 minutes, which is awesome. But, there was two recent back-to-back bed talks you did yesterday and today. One in particular about wanting to be a superhero / superhuman. And then the other one was, yes, are you trying to make sure you're not difficult or harsh with coworkers, but how are you doing being difficult or harsh with yourself? So pick either one of those or both of them, and I'll expand on that a little bit if you wish. But my strong suggestion, if you do connect with Jeff, and even if you don't, go look at Bed Talk for sure, because that's a daily thing for me to be able to walk that through and say, okay, Jeff's going to give me some Jeff wisdom. And then I do my day better because of that. So I appreciate that. So.
Well, thanks, Chuck. Yeah. The bed talk, people always say, what is a bed talk? And actually pretty soon I'm going to change the brand of it, just because this whole thing started. A friend of mine, Dave Rendell, a fellow speaker, said, well, we're not working, we're not speaking. So let's do a talk every day from bed. Well, for me, I started doing it. No one really kept doing it. I've now done 306 episodes over the last year plus. And I still call them bed talks, even though I don't do in my bedroom anymore. So I'm going to shift them over to a brand with the snow globe. I think they're probably going to be called Daily Shakeups. But the one I'll talk about is the superhuman versus just the simply human. As I said at the beginning, I grew up in a world where I learned to take it all on and to just persevere and gut it out. And there are many days in the past, and still sometime today, where I felt like I needed to be the superhero. I need to do everything, do it more than you, work harder than you, work longer than you, have more things in the air, not only full plates, but multiple plates, spinning plates. And I see so many people who feel like they have to be a superhero at work, in their leadership, at home, everything. And my offer is, no, I don't believe that at all. I have some superhero gifts that I use occasionally, kind of like Superman. Mm-hmm. Superman was also Clark Kent. We just didn't see it because in the movies, we only saw Superman being Superman. What I believe we need more of is just simply human. And if you go through your day and you are simply human every day, you become a superhero. Mm. Save your superhero effort and your superhuman effort and all of that go for those tiny moments here and there where that's needed. The rest of the time, we just need you and everyone else around you to be simply human.
I take that as, you're in the group. I don't know if you're going to like this analogy or not, Jeff, But take us like you're in the grocery store at Costco and they give you a sample of something really good and you go, okay, I'm going to buy this now. That, folks, was a sample of Bed Talk, and now you need to go buy the whole 9 yards, buy the whole cart, if you will. But I greatly appreciate that, Jeff. We are running up against it, but like I said, you and I could talk all day long, which is the type of guest I love to have on. But my standard questions towards the end. And I'll let you have this one first, which is if you were to give my audience 3 takeaways from what we talked about today, what would they be?
I'll start in reverse order. Be simply human. Everybody you interact with, see them, listen to them, seek to understand them, and withhold your judgments of them. You do that and you will uplift everybody you interact with. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing we need. So simply human. Second of all, be willing to be vulnerable in order to offer vulnerability. I didn't use that phrase today, but it hit me recently that for me to be vulnerable with you and to model vulnerability, I have to be willing to take the risk internally. So I have to be vulnerable in order to model vulnerability. So take the risk. It's needed, and it's the key to trust. People don't trust people they don't know, and if you're not willing to be vulnerable, they can't know you. And the last thing I would say is just be present. I didn't even use that word today, but the truth is all the things we talked about come down to being present and finding that space to be in the moment for myself, whether I'm working alone or interacting with others. I said at the beginning, the biggest leadership gap is we've got a lack of humanity. And people inherently want to be seen, heard, valued. That's it. And if you do that every day, you'll transform your relationships, your business, your team, and your life experience just by doing that.
Like I said, man, I could spend all day long just having that conversation. I'm looking forward to getting back to the East Coast and getting that to happen. I normally ask about the social media channels you like. I'll skip that one, but I am going to put this up, and that's your LinkedIn profile. You guys should be able to find Jeff without too much difficulty. I always like to say, and I'll give it to you this time, Jeff. When I speak and I ask people to connect with me on LinkedIn, I always say, just make sure you send me a note that says you rocked. Send Jeff a note and say he rocked, because I'm getting comments on the side here of how great this advice is, and it's really honestly very, very cool to be able to do that. So Jeff Nischwitz, like I said, amazing as usual, not that I didn't expect it to be. Love the advice that you give. As a matter of fact, what I'm probably going to do is send a copy of this recording over to my folks at the agency I'm working at, because we're working through Well Life and making sure that works well. So you're dead on in that regard. So thank you again for taking the time today, Jeff. It was greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Chuck. Grateful to be here. Always a pleasure to have a conversation.
You've got it. Well, once again, and as I mentioned earlier, that is another edition of Conversations with Chuck Hester. And now I want to take a second and talk about Pay It Forward and Pay It Forward Tuesdays initiative. Always shouting out my folks, Adam Sinkus, Jennifer Radke, Bob Shears, Brian Basilica, and Benny Fowler. We are, if you aren't familiar with this particular organization, there's our website there at payitforwardtuesdays.org, but we come alongside 501c3s and up-and-coming entrepreneurs, and we have 5 consultants that actually provide consulting advice on how to start their business, get everything from PR to marketing to websites. And our most recent one, which is an amazing recipient in May, is Lindsay Sutherland Bowl. She's the founder of She Walks. She is walking 4,545 miles across Canada on the Take Back Your Power Tour Walk to raise $250,000 for 6 recovery and treatment centers around Canada. So check her out. You can find it on the Pay It Forward Tuesdays website, as well as our social media streams. And we are now accepting nominations for June. So stop by that particular URL there for more information. And if your company or organization provides products and services to the small business, entrepreneur, 501c3 community, we are looking for sponsors that can provide services and products in kind for our 2021 recipients. It's a great way to pay it forward while building brand equity in your community. So contact me for details on that. And so, again, that's it for this week. Next week on June 2nd, one of my favorite people in the world, and that is Marianne Balbo, Group Vice President at Cox Media. Marianne was a local Raleigh broadcaster when I was back in Raleigh, and now going back there as well. But she's now a group vice president in the Midwest for Cox Media. The reason I'm having Marianne on the show is because she's a visionary who believes in leading a team to find their purpose, and that can help them lead to significant business success. Please feel free to share this podcast with your friends and connections. The replay will post very soon on Facebook and YouTube, also through Anchor FM. If you are into audio podcasts, you can find it on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and many other channels. And if you're interested in learning how you can improve your marketing LinkedIn presence, connect with me on LinkedIn and mention this podcast for a free 15-minute discovery call. Again, that's it for this week. Take a minute this weekend to remember those who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. Until next time, this is Chuck Hester reminding you to stay well, stay connected, and always pay it forward.